Hello and welcome back to this class on IFRS 15. In this video, we are going to discuss the second step of the revenue recognition model prescribed by the IFRS 15 is to identify the separate performance obligations, AE called PO. Is not the purchase order, it's performance obligations. So what are the performance obligations? So let's look at the definition of performance obligation. The performance obligation is a promise in a contract with the customer to transfer to the customer either a goods or services that is distinct. It can be one goods or services or a bundle of it that is a distinct. Now, what is the meaning of distinct and how do we identify that distinct from a bundle? We will be discussing in the future slides. Or there is a series of distinct goods and services that is substantially the same and have a same pattern of transfer. For example, monthly services, monthly maintenance services, monthly security services, monthly cleaning services, monthly or annual services, right? So there are different, so these are the services which are pretty much the same, but the pattern is the same, is maybe the monthly or a quarterly or an annually, and they are distributed in the same as a part of the same contract for a negotiated sum of money. That is called a same performance obligation, right? So that is the so the important thing is the distinct. So the services has to be distinct. What is the meaning of distinct? We will look into the next slide. So if these two terms are, if there are these two are the possible scenarios, there is a one goods and services which is distinct and transferred separately, or there is a series of distinct goods and services that is substantially the same but transferred in the same pattern of transfer, then we call it a single performance obligation, not as individual, not small individual performance obligation in this case, and it will be a single performance obligation for the here. So performance obligation can be both explicit in the specifically written in the contract, or it may not be written in the contract, but it's based on the general industry practices or policies. If there is nothing transferred to the customer, like doing some admin work, transportation, or there is not a performance obligation. So it's not a separate performance obligation, right? To be classified as a separate revenue. So it has to be transferred, either it's a goods or it's services. This is transferred. It has to be distinct, and it has to be it can be explicit or can be implicit, means defined on the policy or specifically agreed in the contract. So that is called a performance obligation. So our goal here is to identify a single performance obligation. So there can be multiple, but you have to combine them until you get a distinct, right, one single performance obligation. So that's the idea of this IFRS 15. Now, what is the distinct? So the meaning of distinct is there are certain examples when the performance obligation is distinct. For example, you may be selling your goods which has been produced by the entity, or it has been produced by somebody else, but you are reselling it. So there is a separate performance obligation, distinct. Or you are reselling with the rights purchased by an entity, or you would be doing the contractually agreed upon task. You have a list of contract where you are supplying the contract, where you are supplying the goods and services based on those specific tasks, or you are giving a license, or you are giving doing the constructing, manufacturing, developing an asset on behalf of a customer. So that is all called separate distinct performance obligations, right? So that is the distinct. Now the second criteria, the criteria for the distinct services is that one is the goods and services are capable of being distinct if the customer can take the benefit from these goods and services on its own, or in conjunction with the other readily available resources. So basically the customer does not have to depend on you or to provide you something else in order to enjoy the benefits of these goods and services. If there is such thing, then it has to be a single, it has to be combined into it as well. We will look at some more examples in the future slides to understand it easily. The second criteria to call it a distinct performance obligation is separately identifiable from the other goods and services in the contract. So it is clearly identifiable from the other goods and services. So if let's say we will be looking at the more detailed example in the coming slide. So there are certain conditions that the entity is not using this as an input for the other. So is not the entity is not performing certain applications just as an input of their own obligations in the same contract, right? Other then in that case it will be combined, not a separate performance obligation, not a distinct. And the goods and services are not significantly modifying the customers goods and services, and the services are not highly dependent on the other services in the contract. So if that is the case, then it will be combined. Otherwise it will be considered as a separate distinct application. Now in the next video we are going to be looking at some examples to explain you the more about the performance obligations.